if I was the devil's advocate, I'd say, well, what about the fact though that a woman has to, carry that baby for 9 months and perhaps she doesn't want to? Why should she not have her right to do what she wants with her body, John?
Right. So that would be like a bodily rights argument. And that one thing that's fascinating about bodily rights arguments, and specifically from philosophers like Judith Jarvis Thomson, is that they try to kind of um, go around this whole debate over whether or not the fetus is a person or not. And they kind of grant that a fetus is a person. And they say, okay, well, regardless, don't you think that, you know, like that a woman would have a right to not have her body used? Like, do you think that, like, because you do you think you could really compel someone to use her body to maintain pregnancy? Right. And the issue with bodily rights arguments is that bodily rights arguments are either rely on a premise that is too weak, meaning that they would not include things like a human fetus, or they are too strong, meaning that it would include way too much, and you can basically do anything to a person on the basis of having a bodily connection. And most cases, most arguments, bodily rights arguments, are disanalogous. And the issue is that you cannot use your bodily autonomy and extend that to violating another human being. So if someone's left their stuff on a bench, I can't like sit on it and like just stop them from taking their wallet back or anything else that's valuable. And they could come up to me and say, "Hey, you're sitting on my wallet. Can you, stand up and get my stuff? Otherwise, you're stealing my stuff." And you're like, "Nope, it's my bodily right to stand here and sit here right now, so I'm not going to get up." Or you can't use your bodily rights to be like, "Okay, I'm going to use my fist and punch this person." No, I'm just doing what I want with my body. No, I mean, there's a clear thing that's happening there. You can't use your body to violate other bodies. And so when you are committing an abortion, you are violating a fetus. And there's like the most famous bodily rights argument would probably be Judith Jarvis Thomson, as I mentioned earlier, where she came up with the violinist argument. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the violinist argument at all, are you?
I think I've heard about it, but refresh my memory.
Yeah, so the violinist argument is essentially like imagine you wake up one day and you're plugged into a world famous violinist, and the Society of Music Lovers um, kind of kidnapped you overnight and did this to you. And so the doctor comes to you and he says, "Hey, I'm really sorry this has happened, but the violinist had a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers did some research and they found out that you were the only person who has the correct blood type to sustain the life of this individual. So they kidnapped you overnight while you were asleep, and they plugged you into the violinist against your will. And now your blood is circulating through his kidneys and is repairing him of his kidney ailment. Now you could unplug at any time, but just knowing that in doing so, it will result in the death of the violinist. And then the question that Judith Jarvis Thomson asks is, are you morally obligated to stay plugged into the violinist? And most people would say that no, you're not morally obligated to stay plugged into the violinist. Like very intuitively, you're not morally obligated. And then she says, well, if you're not obligated to, if you can unplug from the violinist, then why can't you unplug, so to speak, from a fetus? The issue with this argument is that it is extraordinarily disanalogous. And, first of all, most college students recognize this immediately, is that you can only use this to defend the case of rape, right? Most cases, the vast majority of abortions, about 99.5% of them, were by choice. Like when the conception was made by choice, there wasn't any sexual assault involved. So if that's the case, then you can't really use the argument to defend a prima facie case of abortion. And that's one thing, especially in responsibility, especially is an aspect of it, being that you played the causal role in the creation of a being with a needy nature. It would be like accepting a toddler into my house and then, if there's a blizzard outside, me randomly being like, I'm not compelled to hold this child within my house, so I'm just gonna like push him out of the house into the blizzard and let him die. And you were responsible for bringing him into the house, so that most people would say that no, you can't really like forcibly and violently remove a child from your home into a blizzard in which you know they will die in. That would be murder. Like when you're forcing them into an environment they can't survive in, that's murder. And the other disanalogy is particularly about killing versus letting die. And in the case of the violinist, unplugging from the violinist, you are allowing the violinist to die. You're letting the kidney ailment essentially take its course, and you are failing to save the violinist's life. And now that's usually fine, but in the case of abortion, you are taking steps, intentional steps that cause the chain of sequences of death. So you are directly killing the human child in this case. And so that's very wrong to do because, yeah, sure, let's say the violinist, you may not be obligated to save the violinist's life, but you would probably think that you can't just like come up to him and like shoot him in the head too. Like surely he has the right not to be killed by you. And so it's kind of a distinction between positive and negative rights, is that, sure, like, you don't have the violinist doesn't have a positive right of having you sustain his life, so you don't have to stay plugged in. But he does have the negative right of not being killed, and so you can't murder him. And so the same would apply to the case of abortion, is that in a prima facie case of abortion, the fetus is perfectly healthy, so there's nothing that is going to kill the fetus that you are the cause of. And so once you start an abortion, then you are killing the fetus. And so if we're going to assume that the fetus is a person already, which is what Thompson is doing, then you can't just kill a person based off of your own will. There are many more disanalogies. I mean, the other thing is like a parent and child disanalogy, or like a kind of like degree of compulsion between there. It's because you know, the thing is that when you say a fetus has a right to life, and then you say that every case of abortion it's is okay, like what Thompson does, then like you're complete. That's just a right to life in name only. That doesn't mean anything. And we know that if a fetus has a right to life, that must come with a degree of compulsion of being sustained by the mother. And this is true, and we can see this for an infant, right? So let's go back to the fetus later and go to the infant right now. Is that an infant is, an infant has and requires compulsion from a parent to survive. Otherwise, if you leave an infant alone, you are violating his right to life. He will die if he's not cared for. And so you can't just be like, okay, I'm going to stop feeding my toddler. I'm going to stop providing shelter to my toddler. I'm just going to kind of push him out into the wilderness and let him live on his own. That it doesn't work that way. You're violating his right to life by doing that. And if you're not violating his right to life by doing that, then an infant doesn't have a right to life, and that would be a logical absurdity. And so, if Thompson is saying that a fetus has a right to life, then surely the only way in which a fetus could survive through the use of a uterus would then be something that he is compelled to have. So that's the only way a fetus can survive. And so, if a fetus has a right to life, then the only way he can survive is the thing that he is obligated to have. And so you can't that then that's also disanalogous because, you know, most healthy people don't need you to be plugged into them to survive. So violinists with a fatal kidney ailment would not require that. There's a lot more disanalogies I could get into as well, like extraordinary versus ordinary care. I think this will probably be the last one I'll get into because I don't want to ramble on too long. Um, but essentially, ordinary care is basically everything that a healthy individual would need to survive. So, basic things like food, living in their natural environment, having their natural nutrition. There's nothing extraordinary about needing to eat if you're healthy, So this is something that people are kind of obligated to have. Extraordinary care, on the other hand, is essentially defined as doing everything possible to help save an individual. So, for instance, if your son is like if there's like an infant who is very sick and we don't have a cure to his disease, and the doctor says like, okay, well we can, cryogenically freeze him for about 150 years, and there might be a cure by the time he gets up. And it's like we wouldn't really be obligated to do that because then that would lead to the absurdity that we should be basically freezing everyone who is about to die from a disease and keeping them alive until we have a cure for them. And so that's not really, that would classify as extraordinary means of care, something that you could do, but you're not obligated to do it. You're not morally obligated to do it. And so the case of the violinist is extraordinary care because usually you don't have to just like use your body to constantly sustain the life of an individual who is unhealthy and suffering from a fatal kidney ailment. Um, but the fetus using a uterus to survive and go through pregnancy, every single human being has had to go through that at some point. And so I mean, that's like one of the most ordinary things ever is that, every healthy individual who is born needs nutrition and needs to live in their natural environment. And every human fetus has at some point needed a uterus, and that is exactly what the uterus provides is the natural nutrition for a fetus and the natural environment for a fetus. So it's like you can't force someone out of their natural environment because that would be killing them. I can't like take some person and just like shove them under the water. That's murder. Can't humans can't live underwater. And if a fetus has a right to life, you can't just like take him and shove him into an environment where he can't survive in. That's also murder. And you can't just deprive him of all nutrition. Like you can't like stop a human being, a born human being from everything that they have, all their food from their fridge. You can't just like steal all the food and not let them go outside. That would also be murder because you're just starving them to death. And so if we assume a fetus has a right to life, then we can't deprive a fetus of the basic functions that the uterus provides to it. And so those are like the kind of the key disanalogies to the violinist argument. And if we want to put it up in this like, kind of wrap it up nicely, and be kind of digestible, there's actually a counter thought experiment that I made, and I call this the fun plug example. So imagine I have a fun plug, and this fun plug has like a 1 in 10 chance of making anyone I plug into dependent on me for their survival. And let's say, one day I go into my 2-year-old child's room while he's asleep, um, and I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna test out this fun plug, and I plug it into him, and oh, by surprise, now he is completely dependent on me to survive. Would it then be acceptable for me to like brutally murder him to unplug if that's the only way I can unplug? Like, obviously not. Like, I mean, what you just did there is you just went into your child's room, who you're caring for, caused him to caused his condition to be such a way, and then you just completely brutally murdered him. That's obviously wrong. You have completely violated him. But that case is far more disanalogous to sorry, that case is far more analogous to pregnancy than the violinist argument is, and that kind of repairs the thought experiment a bit. So that is how I would kind of wrap up that bodily rights arguments. I know I've talked for quite a bit on that, but I think it's something that just completely fails under logical and philosophical scrutiny.
Yeah, I think that was some wicked reasoning and some good analogies that really explains it well. So thank you for taking the time. You've really thought that out really well, and that's awesome and impressive. Hopefully that'll catch some people's ears and make them think in ways they maybe haven't thought of before.